Hello friends, welcome to a class on understanding the difference between capital and revenue transactions. Capital and revenue transactions are regular transactions undertaken by central government, state government, or any private sector like corporates, businesses and all. Even your personal transactions can be classified as capital or revenue transactions. Now you might be wondering how personal transactions can be classified as capital or revenue transactions. That is what we are going to study in this class. I have come across so many students who are confused between how to identify a particular transaction as a capital transaction or a revenue transaction. They find it difficult because sometimes it gets confusing. My endeavor in this class would be to help you simplify the difference between these two types of transactions, as well as give you a simple formula to identify any transaction as either capital transaction or revenue transaction. Before understanding what is capital transaction, or before understanding what are capital expenditures and capital receipts, we have to understand two important terms called assets and liabilities. Once we understand what are assets and liabilities, then it becomes very easy to understand what is capital transaction. And once you understand what is capital transaction, then anything which is not capital transaction is a revenue transaction. So let us understand what are assets and liabilities. Basically, assets, let us first focus on assets, okay? So basically, assets are the things that are owned by you. Apart from this very important quality of assets, there are four more important attributes or qualities of assets. To call anything as an asset, you need to have these qualities. Not necessarily that all four qualities will be present in all the assets, at least two or more qualities will be present in every asset. For example, let's take the example of a building or house. You own a house and that is an asset. Why that is an asset? Because if you give that home or house on rent, then you will get revenue. That rent is revenue on that asset, right? So that is why that house that you own becomes an asset for you. Why? Because it is fulfilling the first quality of an asset, that is, assets generate revenue. You take any asset, we will talk about different assets in future part of this video. All the assets generate revenue. For example, let's take another example, land. If you own a land and if you lease it to someone, then it generates revenue. So assets generate revenue. Take another example, if you own a car and if you give it on rental, then it generates revenue. So first quality of assets is they generate revenue. Now second important quality of an asset is whenever the term of contract is over, the original asset that was owned by you comes back to you. That is, the original asset is returned to the original owner. For example, let's go back to the house example. Once the tenant vacates the house returns to the original owner. That is why the asset is returned. For example, if you have money and if you have given it to loan, given it on loan to someone, then after the term of contract is over, let's say 2 years or 3 years, the principal amount comes back to you. That is why assets are returned to the original owner after the term of contract is over. Third important quality of an asset is assets are usually for long term. For example, your house, loan period, and the land that you own, all of them will be there with you for a very long period of time. That is why third important quality of an asset is they are long term in nature. Fourth important quality of an asset, this is a very important quality, that is assets are usually productive in nature. They are helpful in production of other goods and services. Let's take an example of asset built by government. Road, bridges, ports, right? All these assets are productive in nature, meaning they help in production of other goods and services. For example, roads are used for transportation of vegetables, finished products, consumer durables, machines, capital goods, as well as transportation of services. Assets are useful in production of other goods and services. So these are four important qualities of an asset. You take any example, you will see that either two or more of these qualities will be present to call that as an asset. So now let us understand this with a simple and helpful example. Let's say this lady is owning some amount of money. Now this lady has that extra cash. Now she can either keep it in bank or she can also lend it to someone, right? Let's say she keeps this in bank. Let's say this gentleman here is a bank manager. When she keeps this money in bank, she will earn revenue on that deposit, right? That is what the first quality of an asset. So when she keeps this money in bank, she will get interest on that, and interest is revenue. Basically, what is she doing? See, whenever you keep a deposit in bank, what are you doing? You are basically giving your money as loan to bank, right? And bank, what bank will do? Bank will take that money and give it to someone else as loan. That is what they have license to do. They are called as intermediaries. Why? Because they take money from someone and give it to someone, and in between they earn some interest, and that is called as spread. For example, this bank might be giving you 5% interest on your deposit, but this bank will lend it to someone else at 7% loan rate, and the 2% difference is the spread that bank is earning, right? So basically what this lady is doing is, this lady is giving her money as loan to this bank for some percent interest. Now this interest is revenue earned by this lady on this loan. Hence this loan becomes an asset to this lady. So can we say that the loans given by us to someone else are our assets? Similarly, for example, let's say if central government gives this loan to a state government, then this loan is an asset to the central government. Why this is an asset to the central government? Because it is earning revenue to the central government. So loans are asset for the person who gives it. Now let us take another example. Let's say this lady owns this house and she would like to give this on rent to this gentleman over here. Now this gentleman will have to pay some amount to this lady for using this house, right? And that is called as rent. And this rent is revenue which is paid to this lady for this house. Hence, this house becomes an asset to this lady. One more type of asset that we will understand later is intangible asset. Intangible assets. For example, let's first understand what are tangible assets. Tangible assets are those which are visible to our eye. We can touch it, feel it, right? They are physically present. For example, this house. You can see it, you can feel it, touch it, be inside. But there are certain type of assets which are not physically visible to us and we cannot touch or feel it, but still they are present and they will earn revenue to us when we lend them to someone else. For example, patents. Let's say this lady over here has invented a medicine to cure COVID-19. Now what she wants to do is she wants to lend that the technology to produce that medicine to a company X. Now this company X, for using this technology to produce medicines, this company X has to pay some amount to this lady, right? And this is called as royalty. Basically her patent is earning her royalty, that is revenue. Hence this patent is an asset to this lady, right? And what type of asset this patent is? Intangible asset. So this is what the first quality of asset, that assets generate revenue. So if you see anything which is generating revenue, you can call that as an asset. Second quality that we discussed is returned. Now it's very easy to understand it here. When the term of contract of this loan is over, then this gentleman over here has to return the principal amount to this lady. So the money that she had lent to this bank has come back after the period of contract is over. If this house was given on rent to this gentleman, then after the period of contract is over, let's say this gentleman had taken this for 5 years, then after 5 years this gentleman has to vacate this house. Hence this house has returned back to this lady. And patents also have a period of use. For example, according to Patents Acts in India, it usually varies between 12 to 20 years. So patents are given for 12 to 20 years, and after that the patent expires. Another quality of assets is the original assets return back to the original owner. And third quality is long term. So all of these assets are long term assets. They are for more than 1 year. So assets are for long term use. And fourth quality is productive. Now, if this gentleman who is taking this house on rent may be using this to provide some service, let's say this gentleman is a doctor and he is using this house to provide his clinical expertise, right? So, or let's say he is using this house for producing some goods and services. So, assets can be productive. And let's say there is a machine which is producing mobile phones. So, this machine is an asset. These are some of the important qualities of assets. Now, after having understood what are assets, I'll try to give you some more examples of what are tangible and intangible assets. I have made it clear what is the difference. Now, let us see some examples. Land, obviously, it is a tangible asset. Artwork, let's say there is M.F. Hussein's art. Now, how artwork can be an asset? It can be an asset. For example, let's say M.F. Hussein's art is hung in a museum. Now you have to pay money to go and see this artwork, right? So that is why this artwork becomes an asset. And if an artist decides to sell this artwork to someone, then he will earn money on that. So then this artwork becomes an asset. Loan, I just explained, is an asset and it is a tangible asset. Building, I just explained, it's a tangible asset. Machines are tangible assets. Now, intellectual property like patents are intangible assets, right? For example, you have written a lyrics to a song, then that lyrics you can give it for some license for a particular period of time, and then you will earn revenue on that, or else you can sell it to the producer of the movie and then you will get money for that. So all of those are called as intangible assets. You might be a coder and you might code a software, and then you can lend the software on subscription to someone. You are getting revenue on that, or you can sell it and you will get money on that. Similarly, trademarks and brand are assets. How brand can be an asset? For example, let's say you own KFC brand, and if you give it on franchise to someone, then you will get royalty on that, right? 40%, 30% royalty. And this person who is using your brand cannot own it. He can just use your name and run his shop, but he has to pay royalty to you for using this brand name. Hence, brand is also an asset. Goodwill can also be an asset. Trademark, asset. All these are intangible assets, and all these are tangible assets. If you have understood what are assets, now next important thing that we are going to discuss is what are liabilities. It is very easy to understand liability if you have understood what are assets. One important thing that I would tell you is that to understand whether something is a liability or not, it depends on the perspective. Now, what do I mean? Perspective means same thing can be an asset to someone and liability to someone else. So, basically, what is the definition of liability? Liability means something that you owe to someone else, meaning something that you have to return to someone else, and you have to pay some amount for using that for a particular period. So, that is what a liability is. And a simple thing to know whether something is liability or not is just have to be based on perspective. For example, if we go back to this original example that we used, this lady over here had given this as loan, right? That is why this loan was an asset to this lady. Now, if we look at this loan, now to understand liability, we just have to change our perspective. For example, in earlier example, we saw that this lady had given this money as loan to this gentleman, right, or this bank. That is why this loan was an asset to this lady. Now just change the perspective. Now look at this loan from the perspective of this bank or this gentleman. Now this gentleman has to pay certain amount to this lady for using this money, right? He is paying revenue. So in asset, I told you that assets generate revenue, and liability you have to pay revenue. Basically, if you look at from this perspective, you are paying revenue for using this money, right? Hence this money is a liability to you. That is the first quality of liability. Second quality of liability is, after the period of contract is over, you will have to return the asset to the original owner. Hence this loan, if we look at from the perspective of this lady, then it is an asset. And if this loan is looked at from the perspective of this gentleman, then this is a liability, because he has to pay revenue on that in the form of interest, and after the period of contract is over, he has to return the original money to the original owner. Similarly, this house, this lady had given this house on rent to this gentleman, and it was earning revenue in the form of rent. Hence this was an asset to this lady. Now if we look at this house from the perspective of this gentleman, then this is a liability. Why? Because he does not own it, he owes it to this lady, right? Second, he has to pay revenue on this in the form of rent. Third, after the term of contract is over, this gentleman has to return this house to the original owner. Hence this house is a liability for this gentleman, right? It is about perspective. I will give you one simple example. If central government has given loan to state government, let's say Maharashtra state government, now for central government that loan is an asset. Why? Because central government will be earning interest for the period of contract, or let's say that loan amount is for 5 years. For 5 years Maharashtra government will keep giving interest to central government, and after 5 years Maharashtra government has to return the money to the central government. So now that is why central government के लिए वो asset है. But if you look at it from the perspective of Maharashtra government, then it is a liability. Why? Because Maharashtra government has to give interest on that loan to central government regularly, and second, after 5 years Maharashtra government has to return that money to the central government. Hence it's a liability. So whether something is an asset or liability will depend on from whose perspective we are looking at it. And there are 4 qualities of assets, and there are some qualities of liabilities that I have discussed. Now, after having discussed what are assets and what are liabilities, I would like to tell you one very important definition now. Now, for any transaction to be a capital transaction, either asset must increase or decrease, or liability must increase or decrease. Basically, what I am trying to say is, in any transaction, if there is any change, doesn't matter whether it is increasing or decreasing, if there is any change in assets and liabilities, then that type of transaction will be called as capital transaction. Got it? I will explain with examples. Let's say you sold your house. Now tell me whether your assets declined or not. Let's go back to the previous example. Let's say this lady over here sold her house. When she sells her house, this house, when she owned it, this house was earning her rent. She was getting revenue on that, and she owned it, right? That is why it was an asset to her. But if she decides to sell this house to, let's say, this gentleman, now tell me whether this gentleman will give rent to this lady? No. So revenue stops, and she no longer owns this house. Now who owns this? This gentleman. So I had explained to you that one of the qualities of assets is you own it. Now here, after selling this house to this gentleman, you are no longer the owner of this house. Now he is the owner of this house. That is why this is no longer an asset to you. So your assets have declined or decreased. So this transaction of selling this house to this gentleman is called as capital transaction. Why? Because your assets declined. Got it? Now another example. Now this gentleman bought this house, right? Now tell me whether his assets increased or not. Obviously his assets increased because now he owns this house and he can give this house as rent to this lady now, and she will have to give rent to this gentleman now. So basically the ownership changed from this lady to this gentleman. So now he bought the house, right? So the transaction he undertook is also a capital transaction. Why? Because assets increased. So if we look at look at from the perspective of this lady, assets declined to this lady, and if we look at from the perspective of this gentleman, then his assets increased. So any transaction which increases or decreases assets is called capital transaction. दोनों के लिए हम capital transaction ही बोलेंगे ये transaction को, but there is a difference. Now when she sells this house, she is receiving money, right, in return. So she is basically receiving money. So this is called as capital receipt, because she is receiving money and that money is coming because of change in asset. That is, her assets are declining. That is why this receipt is called as capital receipt. Now this gentleman is spending money to buy this house. Now this expenditure that he is undertaking to buy this house will be called as capital expenditure. Why? Because there is an increase in asset for this gentleman. Basically there is a change in asset, right? So what she is getting for selling this house is capital receipt. What he is spending for buying this house is capital expenditure. So what I am trying to say here is, whenever there is a change in asset, whether increase or decrease doesn't matter. So whenever a transaction involves change in asset, then that transaction will be called as capital transaction. I will give you some more examples from central government and state government transactions to make it even more clearer. Okay, so that is what this asset definition is. Now let us take an example of liability, change in liability. Okay, when this lady had given this money to this gentleman as loan, now she is giving money, right? She is giving money. So this is called as capital expenditure. Why capital expenditure? Why? Because her assets are increasing. Loan is an asset, right? So when she gives money to this gentleman, her assets increased. Why? Because now this gentleman will start giving her interest, right? So hence her this is an expenditure. She is actually spending money, means she is giving money to this gentleman, and this type of expenditure she is undertaking is called as capital. Why? Because her assets increased, right? Now tell me, for what happens to this gentleman? This gentleman took this loan, right? And he received money, right? Tell me whether his assets increased or decreased. Is there any change in asset of this gentleman because of this receipt of money? No, obviously no. There is no increase or decrease of assets for this gentleman. Only assets of this lady increased. But what happened to this gentleman? His liability increased. Why his liability increased? Because when he took this loan, now he has to pay interest on this loan to this lady. That is the first quality of liability, that you have to pay revenue on that. Second, after the term of contract is over, this gentleman has to return this loan to this lady. Hence, this loan is a liability to this person, right? Hence, his liability increased. And as I told you, any change in asset or liability will be called as capital transaction. Now, he is receiving money. It is receipt. And what type of money this is? Capital receipt. Why capital receipt? Because his liability increased. So if we look at this transaction from the perspective of this lady, then it is called as capital expenditure. Why? Because her assets increased. And if we look at it from this from the perspective of the gentleman, then this is capital receipt. Why? Because his liability increased. Any change in asset and liability will be called as capital transaction. Whether you are receiving money or giving money, whether there is a, you just have to look at assets and liabilities. Is there any increase or decrease in assets or liabilities? If yes, then that is a capital transaction, right? If no, then that type of transaction will be called as revenue transaction. It's as simple as that. Now we have understood capital transactions, right? Now what is revenue transaction? Any transaction in which there is no increase or decrease in assets or liabilities, then that type of transaction is called as revenue transaction. Now let us understand both these types of transactions with the help of some very simple and daily life examples. Now tell me, if you are a student and if you receive scholarship from the government, whether this scholarship will increase or decrease your assets. Now before you answer, let me clarify one important thing. Where you might be tempted to say that when you receive money your assets are increasing. No, just having money in your hand is not asset. That will become an asset when you invested it something which is generating revenue to you, right? For example, if you receive this money, and if you receive scholarship, and then if you keep this in bank, then this money will become an asset to you. But simple transaction of money is not any change, will not create any change in asset or liability. That is what, how we understand assets and liabilities in economics. Okay, so for example, when you receive scholarship, there is no change in assets or liability. For example, tell me, when you receive scholarship, do you have to return it to the central government or state government who is giving you scholarship? No, right? So you don't have to return it, so it's not a liability for you. When you receive scholarship, is it increasing your assets? No, you are using this to pay college fees and all, right? So it is not changing any assets or not changing any liability. And when central government is giving it to you, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का कोई एसेट चेंज हो रहा है क्या? नहीं चेंज हो रहा है. लाइबिलिटी कुछ बढ़ रही है क्या सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट की? नहीं बढ़ रही है. सो स्कॉलरशिप इज कॉल्ड एज रेवेन्यू ट्रांजैक्शन. Why? Because there is no change in asset or liability either of yours or of central government. Hence, it is called as revenue transaction. For central government, it will be called as revenue expenditure. For you, it will be called as revenue receipt. Similarly, when central government gives subsidy. So when central government gives subsidy, let's say food subsidy. When you receive food subsidy, there is no change in asset and liability. You don't have to return this money to central government. Central government's assets are not increasing. Central government liabilities are not increasing. Now, don't get into detail like, when central government is giving this subsidy to you, it is borrowing from the market, and then it's basically borrowings are increasing, and the government is borrowing and then giving it to us. Hence, overall liabilities of the central government is increasing. That is another case altogether, and that we will study when we study fiscal deficit and all. But here, just focus on this simple transaction of central government giving you subsidy, food subsidy. When central government is giving you subsidy, there is no change in asset and liability either of yours or central government's. Hence, it is this type of transaction is called as revenue transaction, right? For example, when you pay tax to central government, let's say income tax, is it going to come back to you? No. Is government going to return this money to you? No, it's gone, right? And when you give this tax, are your assets and liabilities changing? No, there is no change in asset and liability from your side. Central government or state government's asset and liabilities changing? No. Hence, any transaction which does not involve change in asset and liability will be called as revenue transaction. For example, this salary, right? Now let us discuss salary. If you work in central government, when you become an IS officer, then you are an employee of central government, right? So central government is giving you salary. So this salary is a regular thing. It is not changing asset or liabilities of either you or central government. Hence, this salary will be called as revenue transaction. Okay, so now let us understand this in depth with the help of some examples. And before understanding, I will give you this formula that I discussed in the beginning to understand any transaction either as capital transaction or revenue transaction. So this formula is very simple, and it involves two very basic simple steps. you look at any transaction undertaken by central government or state government, if you follow these two steps, then you can very easily tell whether a particular transaction is a capital transaction or revenue transaction. Very simple. So this step involves two steps. This method or this formula involves two steps. Okay. First step में you have to ask a simple question to yourself. What question you need to ask? कोई भी transaction हो रहा है, whether that transaction is bringing money to that government or taking money away from that government. What you need to think, whether money is incoming or outgoing. Let's say we are talking about central government, right? Now, any transaction which is happening by central government, you have to first in the first step क्या है? First step ये है कि you have to know whether money is coming to central government or going away from central government. If money is coming towards central government, then that will be called as receipt. So what you're going to do in the first step, you are going to think whether in this particular transaction money is coming to central government or going away from central government. If money is coming to central government, then it will be called as receipt, and if money is going away from central government, then it will be called as expenditure. In second step, you are going to ask a question, and that is, due to this receipt or expenditure, is there any change in asset or liabilities of the central government? So because of this transaction, that is incoming or outgoing money, is there any change in asset and liability of central government? If there is a change in asset and liability of central government, then that transaction will be capital transaction. And if because of that transaction money is coming to central government, then that will be called as capital receipt. And because of that transaction is going, if the money is going away from the central government, then that will be called as capital expenditure. Got it? And second वाले क्वेश्चन का आंसर है अगर नो, मैंने मतलब what was the question that you need to ask? Is there any change in asset and liability of the central government because of these transactions? If there is a change, then that type of transaction is called as capital transaction, and if there is no change, then that type of transaction is called as revenue transaction. That's it. आपको कंफ्यूजिंग लग रहा होगा, बहुत ही ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स लग रहा होगा, बट उतना कॉम्प्लेक्स कुछ है नहीं इसके अंदर, बहुत सिंपल है. आपको सिर्फ दो स्टेप्स फॉलो करने हैं. पहला स्टेप में आपको सवाल पूछना है कि पैसा आ रहा है कि जा रहा है. अगर पैसा आ रहा है तो वो रिसीट होगा, अगर पैसा जा रहा है तो वो एक्सपेंडिचर होगा. ये पैसे आने या जाने से अगर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के असेट एंड लाइबिलिटी में कोई चेंज आ रहा है तो वो कैपिटल ट्रांजैक्शन होगा, और असेट और लाइबिलिटी ऑफ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट में कोई चेंज नहीं आ रहा है तो वो रेवेन्यू ट्रांजैक्शन होगा. दैट सिंपल. नाउ इसको हम और अच्छे से समझते हैं बाय टेकिंग फ्यू एग्जांपल्स. इन दोज एग्जांपल्स इट बिकम्स वेरी सिंपल एंड वेरी क्लियर टू यू हाउ टू यूज दिस टू स्टेप्स मेथड टू अंडरस्टैंड whether a particular transaction is a capital transaction or revenue transaction. Now let us understand this. गिविंग लोन, लेट्स से हम हर चीज़ को अब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव से समझते हैं, बिकॉज मैंने बताया था तुम्हें कि पर्सपेक्टिव मैटर्स, बिकॉज किसी के नज़रिए से देखा जाए तो वो एक्सपेंडिचर हो सकता है, और जिस पे वो स्पेंड किया जा रहा है, और अगर उसके नज़रिए से देखा जाए तो वो रिसीट हो सकता है. गॉट इट? सो हम लोग ये ट्रांजैक्शंस देखेंगे फ्रॉम द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, और इसको हम समझने के लिए दो स्टेप को यूज़ करेंगे, राइट? सो लेट्स कीप दिस स्टेप्स हियर, राइट? गिविंग लोन, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट से पैसा आ रहा है या जा रहा है? सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, लेट्स से ये कोई स्टेट गवर्नमेंट है, राइट? नाउ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट लोन दे रही है, तो जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट लोन दे रही है तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा आ रहा है कि जा रहा है? सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट से पैसा जा रहा है ना, तो ये क्या हो गया? रिसीट है कि एक्सपेंडिचर है? एक्सपेंडिचर है. नाउ जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट लोन दे रही है तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का असेट एंड लाइबिलिटी में कोई चेंज आ रहा है? यस, आ रहा है. लोन इज़ एन असेट, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का असेट बढ़ रहा है, तो ये कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर है. तो जब भी लोन देते हैं तो दैट विल बी कॉल्ड एज कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर. बहुत सिंपल. सेकेंड, लेट अस डिस्कस सेकेंड एग्जाम्पल. बाइंग जेट्स, मतलब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट फ्रांस से रफाइल जेट्स बाई कर रही है। तो दो स्टेप अगेन, जब जेट्स बाई कर रहे हैं तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पास पैसा आ रहा है कि जा रहा है? सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पास से पैसा जा रहा है ना। व्हेन यू बाय समथिंग यू हैव टू पे समथिंग, राइट, एंड यू पे मनी, तो दिस इज एन एक्सपेंडिचर. So jets are capital assets of country, hence central government's assets are increasing, hence it is called as capital expenditure. Very simple two-step method, right? Now let us understand the next example, food subsidy. Now when central government gives food subsidy to me or you for buying food, then tell me whether money is coming to central government or money is going away from central government. Money is going away from central government, so this is an expenditure. Now whether there is a change in asset and liability because of food subsidy, no, as we just discussed, hence it is a revenue expenditure. Very very simple direct method. Now let us understand salaries. अभी just मैंने बताया salaries are a kind of revenue expenditure, right? Now let us understand the next example, roads and ports, right? So when central government is building roads and ports, tell me whether money is coming to central government or going away from central government. Money is going away from central government, expenditure. Now when central government is building roads, these are assets because they are productive in nature. These roads and ports will be used by people for producing other goods and services and transporting other goods and services, hence it is capital expenditure. Now the next example is very very important example, that is paying interest. Let's say central government had taken some loan from World Bank. Now this loan is for 5 years. For 5 years central government has to pay interest to World Bank. Now what is happening is central government is paying interest to World Bank. Now whether this interest is capital expenditure or revenue expenditure, this is very important. First question, again simple two-step method. First question that you need to ask is whether money is coming to central government or going away from central government. Obviously when central government is paying interest to World Bank, money is going away from central government, right? So hence it is an expenditure. Now tell me, because of this expenditure, is there any change in asset or liability of central government? Very important, think clearly, think carefully and tell me, is there any change in asset or liability of the central government? पहले तो ये बात समझ लो, जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने लोन लिया था वर्ल्ड बैंक से तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट की लायबिलिटी बढ़ गई थी, क्योंकि ये लोन सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के लिए लायबिलिटी है, वर्ल्ड बैंक के लिए एसेट है बट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के लिए लायबिलिटी है. बट जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट इंटरेस्ट पे करती है इस पर रेगुलरली, तो क्या लायबिलिटी कम होती है क्या? नहीं कम होती है, बिकॉज लेट्स से सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने 10 करोड़ का लोन लिया था और इस पर 10% इंटरेस्ट रेट है, सिंपल इंटरेस्ट रेट, राइट? तो जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट पे करती है एवरी ईयर 10% इंटरेस्ट ऑन दिस 10 करोड़, लेट्स से दिस लोन इज़ फॉर 10 years, टेल मी आफ्टर 10 years सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट हैज़ टू रिटर्न 10 करोड़ ओनली, राइट? क्या जस्ट बिकॉज इट इज़ पेइंग इंटरेस्ट एवरी ईयर ये प्रिंसिपल अमाउंट कम हो जाता है? नहीं, प्रिंसिपल तो उतना ही रहता है. दिस 10% इज द इंटरेस्ट दैट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट हैज़ टू पे टू द वर्ल्ड बैंक. सो वेन एवर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट इज पेइंग इंटरेस्ट, its principal is not changing, principal remains the same, right? Hence its liability is not changing, it is same, because after 10 years central government has to return 10 crore. So whenever central government is paying interest on the loans that it has taken, there is no change in asset or liability of the central government. Hence interest payments by central government are capital nahi, revenue expenditure. So whenever central government pays interest on the loans that it has taken, there is no change in liability because liability remains the same, because after 10 years the central government has to pay 10 crore to the World Bank. So paying interest, either you are paying interest or central government is paying interest. समझो तुमने लोन लिया है कार लोन, so when you are paying interest तुम्हारा कार लोन तो उतना ही रहता है ना. Obviously when you are paying principal also along with the interest, then your liability might be decreasing, but just I am here talking about only interest, not the principal. So when you are paying interest, your liability remains the same, hence it is a revenue expenditure. Only when there is a change in asset or liability, then we will call it as capital. But यहाँ पे when the central government is paying interest to World Bank, there is no change in liability. Liability remains the same. Hence, it is a revenue expenditure. So it's a very simple, straightforward two-step method. You just first have to ask, पैसा आ रहा है जा रहा है, आ रहा है तो रिसीट, जा रहा है तो एक्सपेंडिचर. ये पैसे आने और जाने की वजह से असेट और लाइबिलिटी में कोई चेंज आ रहा है क्या? आ रहा है तो वो कैपिटल होगा, नहीं आ रहा है तो वो रेवेन्यू होगा. Receiving dividends, for example, let's say central government owns a company called BPCL, Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, right? This is a central government company. So when, let's say, central government with this BPCL, whenever it is in profit, central government will receive dividend. Now ये डिविडेंड की वजह से सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को पैसा आ रहा है कि जा रहा है? ऑब्वियसली जब सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को डिविडेंड मिल रहा है तो पैसा आ रहा है, तो रिसीट है. ये क्या है? रिसीट है. नाउ यस, ये डिविडेंड आने की वजह से व्हेन दिस डिविडेंड कम्स टू सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, इज देयर एनी चेंज इन असेट और लायबिलिटी? सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का कोई असेट इंक्रीज हो रहा है? नहीं. लायबिलिटी इंक्रीज या डिक्रीज हो रही है? नहीं. तो दैट दिस रिसीट ऑफ डिविडेंड विल बी कॉल्ड रेवेन्यू रिसीट. तो डिविडेंड्स किस में आएंगे? रेवेन्यू रिसीट, राइट. नेक्स्ट, पेइंग डिविडेंड सिमिलर है, खाली रेवेन्यू रिसीट की बजाय ये क्या हो जाएगा? रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर हो जाएगा, राइट. बिकॉज यहाँ पे पैसा जा रहा है. सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट या फिर कोई भी कंपनी किसी को देती है डिविडेंड, तो वो कंपनी के पर्सपेक्टिव से दिस इज़ रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. बहुत सिंपल. सिमिलरली, रिसीविंग इंटरेस्ट we just discussed, whenever central government pays interest, it is revenue expenditure. When government receives interest, let's say central government had given money to state government, right? So when state government is paying interest to central government, then money is coming, तो receipt है. Whether there is any change in asset or liability of the central government, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का असेट तो उतना ही है, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को पूरा पैसा लौटाना होगा आफ्टर द टर्म ऑफ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इज ओवर. हेंस देयर इज नो चेंज इन असेट और लायबिलिटीज ऑफ स्टेट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. और इज देयर एनी चेंज इन असेट और लायबिलिटी ऑफ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट? नो. वाई? बिकॉज लोन तो उतना ही बाकी है अभी भी, और लायबिलिटी, इसीलिए लायबिलिटी कोई कम नहीं हुई है, और ये पैसा देने की वजह से असेट भी कोई बढ़ा और घटा नहीं है. हेंस इट इज़ रेवेन्यू रिसीट फॉर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. हम सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव से बात कर रहे हैं ना, तो रिसीट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट विल बी रेवेन्यू रिसीट. गॉट इट? तो यहाँ पे मैंने बहुत सारे दूसरे एग्जाम्पल्स दिए हैं. what you need to do is you need to comment in the comment section whether these are revenue receipts or revenue expenditures, or capital receipts or capital expenditure. First, you need to talk about maintenance of infra. That is when central government builds infrastructure like roads, sports and school buildings, hospitals, उसको मेंटेन करना पड़ता है. वो मेंटेन करने के लिए जो पैसा स्पेंड करती है, एंड आंसर करो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के पर्सपेक्टिव से. So whenever the government spends money for maintaining that infra, so whether that is a capital expenditure or revenue expenditure. Similarly, centrally sponsored schemes, when money is transferred from central government to people or state governments for centrally sponsored schemes, whether that is a capital expenditure or revenue expenditure. Next, these things. Please go through them and follow simple two-step method, and tell me in comments whether these are capital transactions or revenue transactions. So this was a very important topic, and I hope I have tried to make it simple. It is a complex topic, and if you haven't understood it, then please go back to the starting of the video and watch it again. I'm sure you will understand it and you will retain it to solve the questions that might be asked in any competitive exam for with regard to this topic. Thank you, and I will see you in the next video.